Hello, everybody. My name is Eileen, and you're listening to the second episode of the second season of the Big Break podcast. Today in the studio, I have two very special guests with me. Two guests from Fulbright, Eric and Graham. Welcome. Can you tell a few words about yourselves?
Hi, so I'm Eric Halsey. I'm an American from Washington, D.C., who's been living in Bulgaria for 11 years and making the Bulgarian History podcast for 10 years. And I live in Sofia, and I do marketing and a lot of voiceover work and lots of different projects.
And I am Graham. I have been living in Sofia for 5 months. I'm here until June. I'm here on as a Fulbright scholar, and I'm here to work with Bulgarian and Balkan scholars to try to get them into the global conversation more. And basically, I think those of us in the U.S. and English language media need to be listening to people who live here, because the expertise that you all have is valuable for the world. And as Americans, we need to listen to people who have not had the same experience as us in order to learn.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Graham, you're a journalist, and Eric, you're the voice of the metro station, Sofia. Can you tell us something more about this?
I mean, I wouldn't call that my job. It's a 2-hour thing I did years ago. But it was a great project I was asked to do because, the current voice, I don't know the woman, but, it's very heavily accented. It's not so easy maybe for foreigners to understand. And so I know they were trying to find someone who could speak clearly and enunciate in English so that foreigners could understand, but then also pronounce, teatralna or like Kняginya Maria Luisa or something well enough to not be embarrassing for the Bulgarians. And so, they found me as hitting that balance.
He's a big star in Sofia for this reason. The only downside is that the public transit is so much more efficient here than it is in the U.S. that if this were an American subway, people would be hearing Eric for an hour at a time, but because the trips are so short, I'm sorry, it's 10 to 20 seconds every day.
Actually, I haven't been in the new line in Sofia, in the metro station, but a friend of mine shared me a video, which actually I showed Kyle before the podcast, so he can get to know your voice, because he wasn't aware as well.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how did you decide to study these degrees? And where actually you studied them?
I mean, so, my degrees are in history and political science and then nationalism studies. But, I studied at a small school in the U.S., but kind of by accident. Like, I was going to go to Cornell, but then I found out basically my family didn't have the money for me to go there. And so at the last moment, I went to this small state school. But this was actually a really good lesson for me because I went to a school that wasn't so fancy or well-known or anything, but I learned that actually, and this applies a lot to my life in Bulgaria, that smaller places that maybe aren't as, wealthy with all the resources and things, that these are places where you can have a much bigger impact and there's a lot more you can do. So I felt like I was able to do so much. For example, study abroad at AUBG for a year, even though my university had never heard of AUBG, but I set it up. I said, I want to go to Bulgaria and...
AUBG was the reason why you came here?
No, I had a girlfriend in high school who had lived in Sofia because she was American, but her mother worked for NATO. And so she had lived in Sofia for 3 years, and she just told me a lot about Bulgaria and introduced me to some of her Bulgarian friends on online chat. And she gave me a book about Bulgarian history, and just it seemed totally fascinating to me. And as a young person, I was craving so much to be able to travel and see other parts of the world. And Bulgaria was, I found AUBG. It was perfect. It's affordable. It's a U.S. accredited. My credits transfer back. And it's this country I've been interested in for so long. So, I showed up here in 2009 and lived here for 1 year. And, I've not been living here. I went and finished other degrees. But I kind of knew this is a place that was really special to me. And it ended up being the place I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, Graham?
Yeah, so I'm a working journalist. I did not study journalism, and I would say in order to be a good journalist for undergraduate, I don't think you should study journalism, which is often controversial. I went to a small liberal arts and sciences university myself, and I studied everything with a focus on, in particular, history, American studies, African American studies, and actually film. The school I went to is an odd school because it's produced so many big-name Hollywood producers and directors, even though where I went to school is in Connecticut, which is all the way in the east of the country, and people, many of my classmates and people before me who were involved in Game of Thrones, Mad Men, these are big American hits, they went from Connecticut across to Hollywood. So being able to sort of study the form of film has actually, even though I didn't know I would go into radio when I was a student, it's actually helped me a lot now that we're doing a lot of work in the podcasting space. So I think the most important thing for me was recognizing that I'm curious about a lot of different things. So when I thought after undergraduate, when I was working my way towards what I thought would be going to get a PhD, and all of a sudden I ended up with a job with an organization called NPR, which is one of the biggest radio producers in the U.S. I got hooked on the power of what you all are doing, being in conversation with people as a way of learning about our world, which essentially is what journalism should be. It should be a place where you are helping people make sense of these increasingly complicated communities that we live in. So I got hooked, and now, many years later, after starting a few radio programs and being in charge of shows, I now work with a lot of different podcasters and organizations in developing podcasts that are designed to help the general public. So less entertainment, although they have to be entertaining, but what we sometimes call public service media.
It's kind of interesting. I think this is a bit how I fell into podcasting, that it was sort of an accident that I did a lot of debate in high school and college, was very into debate, and I taught public speaking in college and was very much about public speaking, presentations, these kinds of things. But I'd been listening to podcasts since like 2004, and I was going to be an academic historian. I got offered a PhD in London, but it turns out, much like the other college, a PhD in London costs a small fortune, and it was a little expensive. And at the moment I turned away from being a historian, I was thinking, well, okay, what do I want to do? And I sort of fell into marketing as just, seemed interesting. I liked it. It paid the bills. But I knew I still wanted to do something with Bulgarian history. And I thought, well, maybe podcasting could be it. I've loved podcasting for so long, and I've got this background in public speaking and things. And, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by some really good Bulgarian friends who, when I was saying, but maybe I'm not so good at this, who am I to do this? And they were all like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. This is a great idea. You should do it. Absolutely. We're going to make you a website. Just sit down. We're going to make it happen. So, it's just sort of an accident falling into podcasting. But I think a lot of these things, it's you find a passion for something, and you sometimes just find something that you think should exist. And it's a good reminder that it's often you tell yourself, but someone else should do that. But sometimes, no, that someone else should just be you, and you should just try it, and maybe it'll work.
Yeah, of course. So to summarize, you're not working the degree you have studied. And it's important to say that because many of our listeners are 12th graders, and they will have to decide what they want to study in a university soon. In this case, me as well. I'm not pretty sure about my degree, but it's important to highlight this, that we can always work something else than this we study in university.
I don't know if this is taking you off track, but what I would say is the reason that I'm always reluctant to hire, when I was in charge of teams, to hire somebody who had studied journalism in undergraduate school. Graduate school is different. An undergraduate school is, I'm not sure that they actually found something that they were genuinely curious about in terms of learning and studying. Let me put it this way. It's like learning a craft. Mm-hmm. You're learning how to do this kind of work. Doing this kind of work is useless if you aren't applying deeper curiosity and knowledge through this. So the best teams I ever had when I had a daily news show, I had a producer who had studied economics as an undergraduate, another producer who had studied psychology up through graduate school, another student who was a literature student, and another student who was in the natural sciences. I mean, they weren't students, they were workers and employees.
Yeah.
And as a group, that meant that when we saw something happening in the news, we had this expertise from all of these areas. And what we shared was all of these people had decided, oh, I'm curious about this, and I'm going to go through this class to solve these puzzles and learn more, not just to get a degree.
Yeah.
All right. So it's maybe bad information for current students to say, if you're doing something you love and you don't care about the grade, then you actually are probably going to learn more. You probably will also get a better grade because you're doing it out of interest, but it's more important to me that you've spent time, the learning process, the curiosity. So.
Yeah. This is something actually I'm very passionate about because, I mean, even going back to my father, he did work in certifications and things, but about this part of education, that it can feel like so much pressure as a young person because it seems like, oh, well, you need to decide your career now. And we can all agree that's crazy. It's like you're like 17, 18 years old. You're not ready to decide your career. But it feels so final. Like, no, you need to choose now. And, there are exceptions. If you want to be, like a doctor, a lawyer, a chemist, you kind of have to go a certain route. But for most people, my advice is always to focus on building a core set of skills. Because, although the work that I do is quite different than what I studied, what I learned when I studied was how to write, how to speak, how to do analysis, how to think critically. And actually, in a lot of those ways, I use the skills I learned in totally unrelated degrees constantly. And a lot of those kind of concepts and those skills I developed come up all the time. And my feeling is if you're a student, if you learn how to speak well and write well and communicate well and some of these kinds of bedrock skills, you can do a million things. And that's incredibly liberating, I think, to not feel like you've kind of set this one path, and if you end up not really liking it, then you're just sort of doomed. It's, well, no, actually, I can do a lot of things. And I think students should remember that and hopefully just take a deep breath.
Yes, actually, that's the reason why I participate in so much extracurriculum clubs, especially the radio, because that's the thing that occupies my time the most. It's very important really to learn some things, and especially when it's done in high school years, it's much easier later on. Actually, you have mentioned that you haven't studied journalism. I have a friend who is now studying law, and he is a sports photograph, and he was guest in our podcast, our second podcast, and he said exactly the same thing, that you don't need to study journalism to become a journalist. And so shall we move on?
I should add, the way that maybe his experience and my experience is studying journalism by doing journalism, and that's what's you really do study it because you're trying to figure out how do I do this better and what works and what doesn't work, and really what does the world need from me. So that's important too.
Of course. So can we talk now about the pros and cons about being a journalist and a historian? What would you say?
Yeah, I can go first on this one, Eric, I guess. I use this phrase sometimes, every feature is a bug, and every bug is a feature. And I think it's important to recognize that, especially as you go through life. And so sometimes the things that are great about something are the very same things that in different conditions make it horrible. So I think in order to be a good journalist of the sort of work that I do, you have to really genuinely care about a lot of things. And there are moments when that is not good for your physical health because you are carrying the stress of big things. And so just to show how old I am, one of the radio programs I started right basically after September 11th, 2001. It was a radio program that was designed in this moment that was a very difficult and uncertain time for a lot of Americans. And so immediately I felt my job was to help calm people down and think about what we need to learn, not just be panic and worried. And so that was really great in the sense that I felt like I was doing something that the world needed from me, and I cared, and I couldn't stop thinking about this. So, but the downside of that is that you end up sometimes going through several weeks sleeping an average of 2 hours a night, not just because of the work that might pull you on the road, but because your mind is always thinking about what is the world, how do I explain this? And I make it sound like a God complex, and that's really the problem. Like you think you aren't a narcissist, and yet you have this moment where you think, I cannot look away from this tragedy, or people won't learn. And of course that's not true. So it's really amazing to have the privilege to be helping people through these difficult times, and it's really, really hard. So you have to figure out how to take care of yourself so that you don't break yourself. And once you break yourself, you can't help people. And that's why a lot of journalists don't last in the field very long. And not just because of financial reasons. Things change, and journalism is getting a lot less money now than it did 2 years ago. But really, there's a big case of burnout in journalism because of that intensity. So that's one. That's one answer, the best and the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly I know a lot of former journalists in Sofia. It's a popular title. So about being a historian, I mean, in a way, it's hard for me to speak about it because, I mean, am I a historian? It's a question I have to ask myself. I don't work at a university or anything, but I do, research history and I write history. I have recently written a book about history of the First Bulgarian Empire, and I'm looking for a publisher for that book. And so on the one hand, history is something that I'm doing constantly, but it's kind of not quite my career. But in a way, so that gets maybe to one of the cons, which is, making a living being a historian is very difficult. And that's in part why I turned away from it, because I grew up seeing members of my family, a lot of people around me, work like 90 hours a week and just have very bad work-life balances and stress about money and things like this. And I really wanted to have a bit more of a calmer life and maybe a better balance between those things. And that's a bit how I decided, okay, I can do marketing that kind of more pays the bills, and history can be something I'm very passionate about that I do more on the side. But I wish I could be a history professor. I love teaching. I love working with students. It's something that brings me such joy, but it's just hard to make a living doing that. And maybe another con, which is I think a lot of historians talk about, is just sort of watching things happen in the world and wishing people knew about the history behind these things. I know particularly in Bulgaria, it's so bizarre to me watching the kind of pro-Russian sentiment that so many Bulgarians think, oh, Russia's our best friend and things, where the history I've studied, the late 19th century and things, it's like Russia treated this country horribly, like so badly. And it's painful for me to see, how the country is kind of hurt by this, but then people think that this country is so wonderful to Bulgaria. It's a weird disconnect. And I kind of wonder, like, as a historian, you're like, what are you all talking about? This is crazy. This doesn't, but it's the history that they're taught and the history they read.
Yeah.
But on the prose, it's, I do feel the history is vital and it contributes something. And, when I think about what Bulgarian history is and why it's so important to kind of teach it and things, I try to emphasize things that don't get talked about enough. So many Bulgarian history things, they want to talk about the battles and the glory and all this stuff. But to me, I love talking about the National Revival period and how, to me, it was so amazing that, that most countries, the way you build up literature and culture and stuff is the government builds high schools like this and teaches people, and it's this whole formal process. But in Bulgaria, you're part of the Ottoman Empire. And so people did the same thing. They taught themselves to read. They organized schools. They sent students to abroad to learn. But everyone did this themselves. They just figured it out and organized it. And doing that yourself when usually a government steps in to do it, to me, is kind of amazing. And I don't know why that's not talked about more, and that shouldn't be something that Bulgarians are particularly proud of, to kind of build this this unique culture and things in the midst of being a part of a foreign state, when that is just not easy to do. But yeah, so I think history, there's beautiful stories and there's moving stories, and there's stories that I think, told right, shared enough, should have a real impact on the world and change the way people view the world. And the ability to do that is, to me, a tremendous privilege.
Yeah. Well, okay. Then what piece of advice would you give to the students that are not pretty sure about what they have to study after 12th grade?
Well, if you're turning, unfortunately, it's the same advice I gave earlier, but it's exactly that, to, focus on building basic skills that can be applied to a lot of different things, because that gives you flexibility. Also, I think it's okay to just, try working a job for a little bit and then maybe go back to school, thinking that everything has to be done in this specific way, in this specific order. That's not reality. So many people change careers several times in their life and go back to school and things, and that's completely fine. And you're not a failure or anything. In fact, to me, you're maybe brave if you decide to, you know what, maybe I'm not ready. I don't know what I want to do yet. Let me take a little time to kind of figure it out. To me, that's a brave decision to do that. And so, yeah, take a little pressure off yourself. Like, you're going to be fine. You're going to figure something out. Just give it time and allow the process to happen. Because, certainly it's clear in my life. So you never know. You have no idea where your life's going to go. And it might be the most random occurrence that just pushes you in one direction, and you just meet a random person on some random evening that introduces you to a new topic, and suddenly that's the whole your career.
I would say something similar, although I should first say that the educational systems can be quite different in different countries. And so I am speaking from somebody who went through the U.S. experience. I think I'm comfortable saying this across cultures. I think something along the lines of what Eric was just saying. Sometimes you need to take a breath. And a lot of really smart people don't reflect on what they're actually responding to when they feel rushed or worried about something. So you're talking about a universal thing, which is, oh my gosh, I've hit this point where I have to make a decision on the rest of my life. Like, the decision I'm making right now is going to change the course of my life. The question is every decision changes the course of your life, for sure. Does it change it in a way where you then will be stuck? And so, because there's a chance of that, and I'm thinking actually of so many friends of mine who decided when they were young that they were going to be lawyers because it was an answer. Like, you have all these people, your parents' friends, say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they, no, meaning you're in this situation.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in your answer too. But you're in this situation where people are saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's a really impossible question at any age. And at some point you realize, oh, when I say I'm going to be a lawyer, all these people said, oh, good, right? You must be smart. Yeah. And you are going to be successful. You make a lot of money. You'll do good work. And so I think somewhere along the way, for a lot of these friends of mine, it was an answer that they then didn't think about. And there's a whole game that you are playing. You're leveling up, right? In high school, you need to get these grades in order to get to that school. You need to take this range of courses in order to do well on your pre-law exam, and then you need to get into the best law school you can, and then you need to be writing for the law review. So every step of the way, you're winning the game. And then you get to my age, and you look back and you say, I hate to admit it, but I don't like practicing law. I like telling people I'm a lawyer, but I don't actually like practicing law. So the sooner in your life, when you hit those moments and you recognize this is a lot of pressure, take a deep breath and say, okay, why am I feeling this pressure? Why am I thinking about making this choice? And if you're struggling because you think I love chemistry and I love writing, that's a good pressure, right? That's good indecision. But if you recognize, like, all of these people think I should be a doctor and all these other people think I should be this, and you realize, wait a second, I'm not thinking about what I'm interested and motivated by. I guess that's my advice is take a breath, recognize where the anxiety is coming from, and then do your best to make the best decision that you can at that point that isn't one that you can't change. And always, always lean into curiosity. If you're curious about something, then you're going to be motivated. If you're just trying to fulfill an obligation, not only will you be unhappy, but you're developing skills that are non-transferable. If you, what Eric was talking about, if you study this subject and you learn how to go from knowing nothing to knowing something, you can probably transfer that over to a different area. So developing your brain in that way and protecting yourself from your worry brain. It's really hard, but that's my very wordy answer to what might have seemed like a simple question.
Yeah, I am totally on the same page. I support the idea to enjoy the things that we do, because otherwise our existence will be meaningless. Why should we struggle when we can just enjoy the things we do?
And just because you enjoy something doesn't mean it has to be your career. Again, thinking it's like, oh, I love history and, I wanted to be a historian, but there are other ways to engage with these things that you love without, being a careerist in it and going down that path. And it's about really thinking about what makes sense for you. And it's really funny hearing this advice, because in my main job, I write a lot about this thing called Agile, which is a way of working, a way of, doing business and marketing and stuff like this. But I think it applies so much to real life, because one of the core ideas is that you want to do small steps, small tests, and get feedback as you go. And not, if you're a company, you're building a product, we're going to spend 2 years building this, and after 2 years, we'll find out if anyone likes it. Because that's dangerous. Instead, you try to break it into little pieces. And I think that applies a lot to your career and things. That if it's, okay, well, I'm going to go to school for 2, 4, 6 years, and at the end of that, I'll find out if I really like actually doing this as a job. Well, hopefully, if there's some way you can find a way to test that beforehand, and then use the results of that test to pivot and try something a little bit different, you're probably going to get towards a better outcome than if you're just like, well, I decided I was going to do this, and because I decided it, I will stick to it, and I'll figure out at the end if this is a good idea.
Yeah, but then hypothetically said, what if we start studying a degree, and we realize at the end of the bachelor degree that this is not for us, and we just stop studying this? Wouldn't be this waste of time if we stop studying this and we decide, well, this is not for me, I will start studying something else from the beginning, and we will have to study like 4 or 5 years more?
Potentially, but there's a name for this. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. And it's the idea that, once we've invested into something, we are very afraid of losing that investment. But rationally, actually, you can't get that investment back. And the desire to not feel like that time was wasted is emotional, but it doesn't make rational sense. And that because there's no way to get that time back, it's best to just look forward and not think so much about what you invested in the past, but think about where you can go in the future. Because again, plenty of people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s decide, you know what, I'm going to try something totally new. And they start a brand new career and things. But, you don't want to be a person who, in their 40s is thinking, well, 15 years ago, I thought it was too late, because I couldn't waste another year to switch. And now I've been in this thing I don't like for 15 years. Because that's how you end up in that situation.
There's almost always something that's transferable from that, right? So let's say you decided to study the classics. You're a Latin scholar, and you realize you wanted to, you got your degree, and you realized you actually want to work with in sport. With let's say physically disabled or differently abled students. To think that the work you did on Latin is now you've wasted your time it could be very stressful. The reality is just learning how to get through something complicated will help you help other people get through something complicated. So there's we're talking really optimistically here. And the real situations, there's a lot of things that you need to deal with. But I think fundamentally this, thinking, being more agile and thinking in short steps instead of long strides, and just recognizing that you learn something even if you aren't applying it the way that you thought you were going to. And look, learning something is so awesome. Again, if you're a curious person, going from not knowing about something to knowing something about something, if you can only think transactionally, if you can only think, well, now how can I make money off of this new thing I learned? Well, I'm sorry, you're going to have a really unhappy life, because if you can't get joy in going from ignorance to some sort of expertise, it's hard to get through. So this is what I mean about what do you need to activate your curiosity and hold on to your curiosity, because everybody is born curious.
And maybe one little piece of advice to tack onto there, I thought of also probably minimize the amount of student debt you take on, because all this becomes dramatically more complicated if you take on a lot of debt. And luckily, at least in Bulgaria and a lot of Europe, it's pretty easy to take on a very minimal amount of debt. And that's a lot of people in my generation have that problem, where they're willing to totally abandon their degree and try something new, but they have $100,000 of debt from that degree, and the need to keep paying those loans prevents them from making that change. And that is a deeply tragic and awful situation to be in. So I would say, avoid that if you can. And sometimes it's a better option to go for maybe a slightly less prestigious school, because again, my school was not very prestigious at all, but it was also not very expensive. And because I went to a not very expensive school, I was able to just go to Bulgaria and kind of start a career here and figure it out, because I wasn't burdened by huge debt payments. So I think also keep that in mind.
Are we auditioning for an advice column show?
Yeah.
And also listen to yourself more than us, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, when were you talking, one question appeared in my mind, and it's let's say when you're 50 years old, and then you realize you don't want to work the work you've been working your whole life. What we do now? Shall we change our work, or shall we start a new degree? There would be a lot of negative comments, I think, on this, because Bulgarians they don't tend to switch such things.
I mean, to me, if you're 50 and you want to do that, absolutely do it. I mean, even just fundamentally, what that does to yourself and your knowledge of yourself. Yes, I'm the kind of person who is capable of doing that. And, there's a lot of research that shows that, being mentally challenged and really thinking hard as you get older, that's extremely healthy. The 50 is not that old, but still, trying new things, this is what keeps us young. It's what keeps us healthy. It's what keeps us vital. And that, people whose quality of life really goes down as they get older are people who just do the same thing. They never change anything. They don't want to learn anything. That's not a good way to live. It's not a healthy way to live. And so, yeah, I would say you're going to get some questions and comments and things, but persevere through that, and I think you'll be better off.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's already passed that mark, I would say that it's kind of, you actually get to that point and you do not worry what other people are saying. More important to the way you framed that, which is good and interesting, it's a perfect example, right? You just said, what will other people think about you, right? So this is back to, if the people who are making decisions about your joy are not you, you will never find joy, right? Which also means you will never find a workplace where it doesn't feel like work every day. Because that's when you go through periods where your work feels like something you want to do, which you won't have, there will be a lot of times when that isn't the case. But when you go through a week and you realize, maybe I didn't want to get up early, but I was happy to get to the office. That's the life you want. And if you are letting other people be in control of your joy, which is what somebody is doing when they say, I really don't like doing this, but if I change now, people will talk about me. The reality is the unhappiness that you're going to feel from other people, and look, honestly, that's their problem, right? Somebody who is spending their energy judging your decision to go for something you're interested in, that's their problem. And yet, if you are holding on to that as your problem, it's a tragedy.
Yeah. I'm an open-minded person, and I don't mind such things, but there are people who always judge.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, we're conditioned to be thinking about how are people thinking about us. But I think let's say this: if I could go back to my middle school self, like in that period, which I don't know what it's like here, but in America, middle school is the worst, right? Because you're actually growing up at different ages, and every one of us would go to school thinking, "Oh my gosh, if this shirt isn't quite right, somebody's gonna judge me," or if, "Oh my gosh, is my hair out of place?" Every person is thinking about themselves, and we think everybody else is looking at us, and actually they're all going, no matter if they're the cool kids or the jock or whatever, they are also thinking about, what if I have the wrong shirt on? So the energy that each of us was spending when we were 13, 14 on those concerns, we wasted so much time being miserable when everybody else was thinking about themselves. So this is this is why you need to be kind, and it's a different form of rigorous with yourself. You need to push yourself to think, why do I want to do this? Why am I making this decision? Is it because of something I've thought about, or am I reacting to something that other people are thinking about?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about pieces of advice. Shall we move on to my next questions, which are still about your degrees? Graham, you as a journalist have many opportunities to work on different projects, and I received an information from Kyle that you specialize in fake news.
Well, I definitely don't specialize in doing fake news.
No,
that's fake news from... No.
That's just a hobby.
You're campaigning against them.
Yeah, so what I would say is what I'm looking for is ways for us to counter the effects of disinformation, fake news, malinformation. And we have this everywhere. It's really part of the reason I am in... Kyle's done his research. Part of the reason I am in Bulgaria is because this is an area that is at special risk to disinformation and misinformation, or what we might call, or what we do call, hybrid warfare. Right? Warfare that is trying to capture a state. We sometimes use do you know this phrase, state capture? We look at a Kremlin strategies that go back a couple of decades that are really about, we need to make sure that Serbia, Bulgaria, even Spain, the U.S., we need to use these methods to make sure that we are able to influence the people's attitudes, what people care about, and it's not the old propaganda tools or spy tools. It really is just the most efficient way to do that is to just flood media markets with things that either aren't true or are some of the facts are true, but it's told in such a way that it's manipulating the story. And we are all susceptible to this, right? If you sit down and write out some things, I could find somebody who would say, "You believe this to be true, but it's not true. Why do you believe it?" And so I think this is one of the most critical moments of this period, especially this year, because we have an historically high number of people around the globe who are going to vote for something this year. Some of them, it's not really a free vote, but the act of voting is happening all over. Indonesia is next week, right? One of the most populous nations. So there's a lot of people going and making decisions about, and I would say politicians, they should be government officials, but in America, they're only politicians now. They don't actually do much governing. And in this, having people be either a combination of ignorant and apathetic is what authoritarianism needs. Right? They need people to be skeptical of expertise. They need people to say, this is why the Kremlin logo for Radio Sputnik and other places of the, going back 10 years was question more. Right? And that sounds like, this is what I mean, that sounds like exactly what journalists want. This is what I want you to do. I want you to use the question mark, not the exclamation point. And yet they're doing this to say, well, who knows what's true?
Yes.
How can you trust anybody? And it's been very effective. We know more and more about how effective this is and how it's working. Our tools are not working, right? A lot of fact checking is not making things better. So but I'm going to be more hopeful because we're learning more and more, and people in America are not spending enough attention. People here are. A lot of people here are. I mean, Bulgaria is one of the places most prone to the effects of disinformation, and yet it's also a place, I've never been any place where people are more committed to finding solutions to this. So this is a moment because we know the tools, we know the effects, we actually, I hope, can find better practices to, we'd say, mitigate, to make the threats, lessen the threats. And it is, I'm going to talk like an old guy again, like it really is your generation. It's people who are in university now and graduating high school now who can make this change. And part of how you make this change is to decide, well, we're not going to do all this the same way. We're actually going to do what you're doing here. The most powerful tool is actual, genuine, curious conversation. And the podcasting age and a lot of radio still, the best work involves people, two human beings sitting down and talking to each other and asking questions and really being interested in what the other person's answer is and building on it. And that feels good as a human, even when it's hard. And the work that the cynics do is they open up the microphone and say, let me tell you what's going on. This is what's going on. Right? So you all have the choice to recognize, when somebody is acting like an aggressive know-it-all and is being unkind, which means like racist and pretending they know what's going on in somebody else's brain, you're the ones who I think are going to be able to stop listening to that, and instead of arguing with those people, say, you know what, we're going to go over here and try to solve some things and be human with each other. And so I said all the bad stuff, and it's really, really, really bad, right? One of the things in coming here and studying this more closely is it is worse than I thought, and I probably was covering it more closely than a lot of people. And there's a way through this.
Yeah, I mean, I have very strong feelings, and really reinforcing what Graham talked about, that first, we're all susceptible. I mean, it's a point I always like to make, that our brains, the way they work, is the more we hear something, the more correct it sounds, even if it's nonsense. If you put on some headphones and you listen to an audio of someone saying the capital of Greece is Paris, and you heard someone say that 1,000 times, it would begin to emotionally sound correct. I mean, living in Bulgaria for all these years, sometimes I will make grammar mistakes in English because they don't sound like mistakes to me anymore, because people around me have, said this exact way so many times that it sounds right to me, and I have to remind myself, actually, no, it should be this way. We're all susceptible to this. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're weak or something. It's just a basic element of how our brains function. And that's why, it's so important for all of us to be aware of our flaws and how we think, and be aware of exactly these kinds of tools. A lot of times if I'm talking to high schoolers and things, I'm trying to emphasize exactly this point that, oligarchs and a lot of these politicians and things, they exactly want you to think, what's the point? They want you to be cynical and nihilistic, and to fight a kind of sincere belief that, yes, we can make this country better. Yes, we can solve these problems. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it. And that when you have that belief and that desire to improve things and to approach improving things with this sincere openness, that is how you really genuinely kind of stick it to the, the powerful oligarchs and people like this that have been holding this country and this region back for so many years. And that, when so many young people think, that's so lame, or like that's, why should I care about this? What does this have to do with me? That like you're exactly playing into what they want you to do.
Yeah, well, I would like to add two things. First, Graham mentioned our generation, that we are going to be maybe the solution to the problem with fake news. We discussed this topic with Kyle in the first episode yesterday, and as long as I remember, we said that Gen Z, our generation, is very manipulating. Let's say TikTok, one of the most used social media platforms. Every day, thousands of videos, and you can literally believe everything that's posted there. And maybe we have this feeling that everything could be like fake. And that's the reason why we doubt everything so much. And also, I would like to add, because Eric mentioned Paris, there was a speculation, let's say, a month ago, I think, that the Eiffel Tower in Paris was caught in fire. And it was AI-generated pics. What do you think about AI? Because I think it's very related to fake news. Almost everything could be generated with AI lately.
Well, we need another 2 hours for that.
It's a big topic.
We've already maybe put your listeners to sleep with some of our answers, or mine, not Eric's. But I don't disagree with you, but I also think sometimes when I ask a question like that of myself, I want to go back and unpack it and think, okay, does the answer, whatever answer I come up with, does it actually help me move forward, right? So when I realize a lot of yes, no, is AI going to ruin the world? For example, people will say, or I have so many debates that I see in the world among journalists about is AI really good or is it really bad? The answer to that doesn't help me. Right?
Yeah.
So the way I'm looking at AI now is to think about, okay, what are some of the ways that AI is a tool that is helpful to us? It's here. So AI is here. It's been here longer than a lot of us realize, and I don't mean that in some sort of conspiratorial, we're living in the Matrix.
Yes.
There are ways in which versions of AI have been used for over 50 years, right? But especially the rapid growth of AI in the last 18 months means everybody's paying attention to it, which also in this age of TikTok and punditry means everybody has something to say about AI. It's like we're all being interviewed on television all the time.
Yeah.
And what's much more constructive is to understand how it works, how it can be used effectively. And again, I'll just stick to journalism. There are things that people are doing that experiment with AI that are really about processing big data sets. And so being able to use a tool to look at more information that we needed 2 years to synthesize 10 years ago, and we can do in 2 minutes. This is scary, right? The way life is speeding up. But looking at it and say, me using this tool this way, does this benefit my listeners? There are other tools where it's a shortcut and it really oversimplifies, and it means we're coming up with answers without doing the equation. So we don't. If you don't do the math, you don't understand where the answer came from. So we need to stop doing that. What I think you're pointing to, though, is ways in which we look at content and are susceptible to now machine learning manipulated stories. We actually are going to develop more and more tools to be able to immediately see that image and know it's been, and be told it's manipulated. So the first question is, as those tools develop, are you going to use them, or do you just want to sit in the space where you can be impassioned by something that may not be true. Yeah. But the bigger one is just, and this is what I mean about the generational opportunity here, the bigger one is to look at something you see and say, what am I getting from this? And what has to be the truth behind this if this detail is true? Or if this, what are they trying to tell me with this? And if it's not something that is, again, driven by curiosity, like, this feels like something that somebody would be doing for a purpose. Now, obviously, the Eiffel Tower is a good example because there will be people, as long as you know to check different sources, you can find out right away that wasn't true, or soon enough. You're certainly not going to sit here in Haskovo and say the Eiffel Tower is burning down. I need to go to Paris and help this, right? Yeah. So by the time, how harmful can it really be, unless it's what's more dangerous is when somebody says, these people, anytime you hear they or these people, somebody's trying to get you to hate people for just being who they are. And so when you say, look, the Eiffel Tower is burning, I know who, I'm not even going to mention groups of people, and you could imagine somebody would say, Eiffel Tower is burning because these people are there, and this is what they're like, and this is why we need to insert horrible thing here. So anytime you see that, that's another moment to say, take a breath and say, wait a second. They're using they and these people. They're using this news moment to make me hate somebody who has no power anyway, right? We're always doing this to groups who don't have much power anyway. You know why? Because they can't fight back, right? So it's AI is part of the larger issue. It's making it more challenging, but the sooner that a generation like yours turns to taking a breath and thinking, what does this really tell me? The sooner that those tools are not as effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of problem solving. Like, if I see this thing, this picture of the Eiffel Tower burning, I can jump to like BBC or New York Times, Washington Post, and or I could just look for like a French live news station, and I guarantee you the French news channel, the Eiffel Tower is burning, they're going to be showing it, and you can instantly figure that out. But besides thinking about that kind of specific thing, it's a lot of just being open and wondering who's really saying this? What's really the message? I mean, I think of an example that a friend told me about where someone saw on the news that there was a refugee in Bulgaria, and the news person was interviewing them, and the person said, "Oh, here at the refugee camp, the Wi-Fi or something was very, very bad," and the person watching the news was like, "Oh, they're complaining. It's just how dare they complain? Lots of Bulgarians don't have Wi-Fi. Who do they think they are?" And the person I knew said to them, "Well, what was the question the journalist asked? Because we didn't see that. It could be that the journalist said, 'What are some problems here at the refugee camp where you live?'" And we're so quick to just rush in and draw some conclusion or jump to somewhere. We're not stopping and asking, well, who is actually, what was the question? Well, what is even the context? There's lots of reasons this person could have said this other than the one I just immediately jumped to. So a lot of it just comes back to, I think, being humble, not thinking it's like that, oh, I know all the answers, or I saw this, so this is happening. And, just realizing that the world is incredibly complicated, and one of the best skills you can learn is how to just ask what's happening and really try to come up with concrete ways to test your ideas and to see, is this channel showing this? Is this channel showing this? Okay, then it's probably not actually happening, or, what is. It's critical thinking.
Yes. Well, it was very nice to speak to you. Unfortunately, we have to stop with the podcast because of technical issues. Yeah, our batteries are running out.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So before we end up the podcast, I would like to invite Kyle in the frame as well, because our team has something special for you as our guests. So it was a pleasure for me to speak to you. I can continue this conversation for hours, but unfortunately we have to stop. And now our team has a special gifts for you because you came all the way from Sofia to here, and Kyle helped so much with the organization of this event. You can open them. They are branded things of our radio, as well as some books about Haskovo in English, so you can read and learn more things about our beautiful and small city.
Oh, I love a good mug.
Right.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you so much.
This is brilliant. One of the most important things for podcasts is, do you have merch now?
Yes, we have.
Thank you very much. And it really is great to hear your questions and talk about these things with you, and so really appreciate being invited, and I'm really excited for everything that all of you students are doing here. This is a terrific service, and I think you'll benefit for the rest of your lives from taking on this challenge, right? You're doing something you didn't know how to do, and now you know how to do it. It's a life skill.
Yes, it was an honor to have you as our guests here. Especially, we have the opportunity to learn more things about the broadcasting in general from you. I hope we have shown you some things about our school as well. We have pretty good things here.
Mm-hmm. You do.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Cheers.
I mean, I talked before about choosing a life in Bulgaria in part because it's a place where you feel like you can do a lot. And things like this, opportunities to talk to people like you and share knowledge and learn from you all, like this is one of the big reasons why I love living here and love making a life here. So thank you all for having us so much. It's been a real honor and a pleasure.
Thank you as well. So yeah, this was the end of our episode. You can listen it in YouTube and Spotify. Don't forget to follow our social media accounts eg.radio21 in all social medias. Thank you all.